Why does history sometimes freeze the greatest monuments of human ambition in the most unsuitable places? Imagine a grim industrial zone in New York City's Queens district in the United States of America. Endless rows of blind, gray concrete warehouses, the continuous roar of heavy trucks, thick clouds of acrid smoke from a giant power plant, and the pervasive smell of machine oil that soaks even into clothing. And suddenly, amid this brutal kingdom of industrial chaos, on a small, untouched green hill, a grand granite mansion from the 19th century stands alone. 27 spacious rooms, 12-foot ceilings, massive doors of heavy carved oak, and a stunning rotunda with a stained glass dome through which soft afternoon light once poured onto marble floors. Today, this house is forever pushed away from the water, mercilessly squeezed in the vise of concrete, and almost forgotten by the world. But 150 years ago, it was from here that an empire was managed, the perfect sound of which still resonates in the world's best concert halls. To whom did these cold granite walls belong? And why did history so diligently remain silent about the tragedy that unfolded behind their magnificent facades? The name of this man is familiar to absolutely everyone who has ever touched the black and white keys of a concert grand piano, or simply listened to classical music in live performance. William Steinway. The son of a German immigrant who, thanks to his phenomenal mind and iron will, turned a modest family workshop into a global, invincible monopolist in piano manufacturing. However, this story does not begin in a palace on fashionable Fifth Avenue, where the haughty elite of that time traditionally resided, but on the wild, swampy shores of the East River Strait. While other American magnates built their luxurious residences in overcrowded Manhattan to display fabulous wealth at lavish social balls, William stubbornly looked in a completely different direction. He was a man whose most striking and frightening feature was a manic obsession with total control and long-term planning. He didn't just want to produce the best musical instruments in the world. He wanted to build his own ideal world around his production. A world forever protected from unpredictable workers' strikes, suffocating high taxes, and the criminal urban filth that was eating away at New York at that time. None of his competitors knew that behind the impenetrable facade of an extremely successful, tough, and self-confident industrialist hid a deeply vulnerable man. A man who every evening sat down at a mahogany table and methodically entrusted his most intimate fears to the pages of his personal diary. 36 years of daily, utterly frank entries, which today are quietly stored in archives, reveal a stunning picture. In public, he was an uncompromising titan of business, driving the country's economy. But inside his grand mansion, he was a man desperately seeking love, loyalty, and stability, but ultimately receiving only the bitterest betrayal. In 1870, when William acquired this estate for the colossal sum of $127,000 by the standards of that time, it seemed utterly impossible that this architectural masterpiece would become the site of his greatest historical triumph and, at the same time, his most devastating life drama. The mansion already stood on this land, built 10 years earlier by a successful optical instruments merchant who invested $85,000 in its construction. It was a magnificent Italian-style summer residence on 70 acres of land with direct, picturesque access to the water. But Steinway saw in this place not just a beautiful rich man's country house, but an ideal foothold for his personal industrial utopia. William was a classic outsider, a bright representative of new money, a man who earned his vast fortune with calluses on his hands and wood dust ingrained in his lungs. The old aristocracy of the United States of America, who inherited their capitals, could look down on him. But William was completely unconcerned. He looked at the acres of empty, grass-covered land in Queens and clearly saw there future paved streets, schools, free libraries, and huge, bright factories. He even conceived a project that seemed to his contemporaries absolute clinical madness: to pierce the granite bottom of the deep and dangerous river, to lay giant underground tunnels connecting his ideal isolated city with the pulsating heart of Manhattan. Steinway meticulously planned every second of his life, every cent in the budget of the growing company, and every step of his loyal subordinates. The complex mechanism of his global business worked more precisely than the best Swiss watches. But it was precisely at that historical moment, when his external empire began to acquire monumental, eternal outlines, when the thick granite walls of his new home seemed to reliably shield him from any life storms, that the foundation of his personal happiness developed an irreparable crack. A man capable of unerringly calculating the tension of thousands of steel strings inside a grand piano to fractions of a millimeter proved utterly powerless against chaotic human nature. Behind the massive oak doors, an invisible conflict was already brewing that would forever change the fate of the great visionary and turn this luxurious mansion into a silent monument to shattered hopes. To understand why William Steinway so desperately sought total control, it is necessary to look back to the very beginning of his path, when he was still called Wilhelm Steinweg. In 1850, the 15-year-old youth, together with his father Heinrich and brothers, stepped off the deck of an overcrowded ship onto the dirty, noisy docks of New York. They had fled from Germany, escaping the bloody consequences of the devastating European revolutions of 1848. This youthful experience forever shaped the worldview of the future magnate. For William, chaos, unpredictability, and political storms became synonyms of ruin and poverty. In his understanding, salvation lay only in absolute, mathematically precise order. The piano that his family assembled on long evenings was for him not just a musical instrument. It was a living symbol of the triumph of human reason over the surrounding disorder, with thousands of the most complex wooden and metal parts work in perfect, predictable harmony. But in the United States of America, the young immigrant faced a harsh collision with reality. Mid-19th century New York was a ruthless city, strictly divided between old Dutch and British families, whose capitals were passed down from generation to generation. This haughty elite, basking in luxury on Fifth Avenue, adored the fine arts and classical music, but treated with undisguised contempt the people with hands roughened by work and a strong German accent who created these superior instruments. William found himself at the very epicenter of a brutal social conflict. He was a typical outsider, a representative of new money, to whom the old system clearly indicated that his place was in the dusty production workshop, not in refined social salons. And then he chose his first brilliant strategy, based not on blind luck, but on cold calculation. He realized that breaking into the closed club through humiliations was impossible. It was necessary to make the elite come to him on bended knee. When, in 1853, the family officially founded the company, William bet on aggressive innovations and impeccable engineering genius. He began patenting unique mechanisms that made the sound of their grand pianos incredibly powerful and pure, capable of filling America's huge concert halls. But William's true strategic gift manifested when he faced the main obstacle on the path to greatness: New York City itself. By the early 1870s, Manhattan had turned into a boiling cauldron of union strikes, growing street crime, and extremely corrupt politicians who mercilessly raised taxes on successful manufacturers. Steinway's competitors spent huge sums on bribes to officials and fighting worker uprisings. William, however, decided that playing by the rules of a deeply diseased system was pointless. His solution was not to win an unfair game, but simply to flip the chessboard. He turned his gaze across the East River Strait to the desolate, high grass-covered lands of Queens. His plan was monumental, and at the same time, frighteningly pragmatic. Having bought hundreds of acres of undeveloped territory, he began building Steinway Village, a completely independent settlement for his employees. At first glance, it looked like an incredible act of generosity and a true social utopia. William built comfortable brick houses for the workers, opened the first free library in the area, a kindergarten, a magnificent park, and even modern public baths. But it was precisely here that the deep psychological ambiguity of his ambitious character lay hidden. William was not only a great idealist, but also a ruthlessly calculating strategist. By creating this well-appointed paradise, he was effectively binding the workers to him with a dead grip. He was their sole employer, their strict landlord, their generous benefactor, and their judge. In Steinway Village, there was no place for unions and strikes, because any dissatisfied rebel instantly lost not only a stable salary, but also a roof over his family's head. It was a perfect, impeccably clean golden cage in which the talented industrialist finally achieved the desired total control over people and circumstances. William sincerely believed that if you create perfect conditions around a person, you can fully control his behavior, loyalty, and even his fate. He viewed the world as a giant clockwork mechanism where every gear could be carefully oiled and precisely adjusted. This philosophy of order brought him millions of dollars and unquestioned world domination in the music market. But it was precisely this cold, mechanistic certainty that absolutely everything in life is subject to strict calculation and control that ultimately blinded him cruelly. He did not realize one simple truth. The human soul, unlike a tensioned steel piano string, does not obey the mathematical laws of physics. And while he brilliantly built the impregnable walls of his industrial empire in Queens, inside his own luxurious mansion, the poisonous seeds of deception that could neither be calculated nor prevented were imperceptibly sprouting. In 1861, William Steinway made a historic decision that was to become the final, most resounding chord in his flawless symphony of perfect life order. He got married. His chosen one was the young Regina Roos, who was barely 17 years old at the time. This was not a banal wedding of two ordinary people. It was a grand, meticulously planned merger of two completely different worlds. William, at the zenith of his activity, embodied the rough, unstoppable force of new American capital. Calloused hands remembering the icy weight of cast-iron machines, an inquisitive mind absorbed around the clock by architectural drawings and financial estimates, and an unquenchable ambition burning from within. Regina, young and tender, was to become the graceful symbol of his ultimate social triumph, living proof that the former poor German refugee could now afford the greatest luxury in the world, a refined, almost aristocratic family life. She brought lightness, incredible beauty, and social elegance into his harsh life, thoroughly permeated with wood shavings, machine oil, and strong tobacco. To conservative New York society, their union looked like an ideal deal. The boundless power of developing heavy industry merged with youthful grace and purity. William sincerely believed that the status of an upright husband of a young beauty would finally and irrevocably open the tightly locked doors of the snobbish elite for him. But it was precisely here that his main life miscalculation lay hidden. The great strategist did not account for the fact that a living, breathing person is not a submissive piano string that obediently sounds only when the master confidently presses it. To give this young, ideal family a truly worthy setting, William needed not just a huge house. He needed a real castle, a monumental symbol of his boundless influence, majestically rising above his growing possessions. In 1870, he found what he was looking for, and this discovery turned Queen's history upside down. For an astronomical sum of $127,000, he acquired a grand estate that radically differed from everything the predictable bourgeoisie of that time was building.
This mansion was built between 1857 and 1858 by the incredibly successful merchant of scientific and optical instruments, Benjamin Pike, Jr. Originally conceived as an exquisite summer residence in the fashionable Italian style, the house was an absolute architectural masterpiece, the original construction of which cost $85,000. When the manufacturer and creator of the world's best grand pianos first stepped over the threshold of this stunning building, the old forever met the new, and the refined cabinet science of the past gave way to the aggressive, uncompromising industrial progress of the future. The mansion amazed with its incredible paradoxical contrast, which perfectly reflected the character of Steinway himself. From the outside, it was a stern, impregnable fortress, with massive granite walls that seemed to arrogantly challenge time and natural elements, reliably protecting its inhabitants from any adversities of the outside world. But as soon as one crossed the threshold, the guest was instantly enveloped in an atmosphere of dizzying elegance and fragile, almost theatrical beauty. Soft light penetrated through the huge stained glass dome of the central rotunda, tinting the cold marble floors with warm shades of gold leaf and deep purple. The heavy, sliding oak doors dividing the grand halls were adorned with a striking historical detail. On their thick, crystal-clear glass were deeply engraved microscopes, telescopes, and navigational compasses. For William, these ancient scientific symbols instantly acquired a new, deeply personal meaning. They embodied ultimate precision, cold calculation, and unerring vision of a distant goal. Traditional European classics here organically intertwined with bold American ambitions. William methodically transformed this house from a quiet summer retreat of an optics merchant into a pulsating, sleepless strategic center of his global corporate empire. It was precisely here, in the ringing silence of the high rooms, that he planned the laying of unimaginable underground tunnels and the expansion of factories. However, while the great visionary enthusiastically built around his young wife these luxurious, cold granite decorations, he was too busy changing the entire world to notice one frightening detail. His beautiful Regina was slowly and silently suffocating in this deaf, golden cage of his colossal, inhuman ambitions. When William Steinway's heavy carriage approached the mansion, the first impression was always frighteningly monumental. From the outside, this building made no attempt to appear welcoming. It was built from cold, blue-gray stone and heavy granite. The mansion rose on the hill like an impregnable fortress, whose thick walls were meant to withstand any siege from the outside world. But as soon as one crossed the threshold and closed the entrance doors behind, the harsh reality of industrial New York instantly disappeared, giving way to a completely different universe. The mansion served as an exact psychological portrait of its owner, a rigid and uncompromising facade hiding inside an incredibly complex, sensitive, and mathematically precise mechanism. The transition from room to room was like a journey through the labyrinths of the great industrialist's mind. From the cramped, gloomy outside world, the guest entered the central grand hall, where breath was taken away by the sudden sensation of boundless space. The ceiling height reached 12 feet. Directly overhead rose a stunning two-story rotunda. During the day, soft light poured through the huge stained glass dome, making dust particles dance in the air and tinting the cold floors with warm shades. The effect was calculated to the millimeter. The guest was to feel tiny before the grandeur of this house, but at the same time be completely enchanted by its refined beauty. Next came the grand halls, which were heated by 5 huge fireplaces made of rare Italian marble. Every detail here quietly whispered of status and wealth. But the most striking element, revealing the true essence of Steinway, was the sliding doors. The massive structures of walnut wood hidden within the thickness of the walls were adorned with glass panels featuring deep engravings. On them were scrupulously depicted telescopes, microscopes, and compasses. These historical symbols had come to the house from its first builder, a merchant of scientific instruments. But for the manufacturer, they became a personal, philosophical manifesto. In his world, absolutely everything had to be measured, calibrated, and subordinated to the strict laws of physics. From the light-flooded, spacious guest rooms, where the laughter of local politicians and influential businessmen echoed, the path led to the Holy of Holies, a single-story library wing with huge bay windows. This was a sharp transition from public grandeur to deep, focused intimacy. The air here was heavy with the scent of ancient leather bindings and strong tobacco. It was in this ringing silence that Steinway made decisions that changed the face of the United States of America. Here, he drew plans for underground tunnels, funded the development of the first automobiles, and managed the fates of thousands of his workers. Suddenly, another secret, invisible to the eye, was revealed. The house was not just a beautiful decoration. It was a fully autonomous, breathing machine. Underground hid 3 giant cisterns for collecting rainwater, and on the attic was a copper tank holding 1,000 gallons, ensuring uninterrupted water pressure in all 27 rooms. Steinway did not depend on the city water supply, just as he did not wish to depend on anyone in his global business. He had built his own closed ecosystem. The crowning touch of this architectural psychology was a 4-story tower topped with an octagonal dome. This was the creator's observation post. From here, William could gaze for hours over his 440 acres of land. He saw the smoke from his factories, the neat roofs of his workers' houses, and this panoramic view gave him the sweet illusion of absolute control. It seemed to him that if he could see his empire, he could protect it from any unpredictable disasters. But from this same tower was visible another, deeply tragic picture. Far below, on the spacious verandas with cast-iron Corinthian columns and in the empty grand corridors, wandered his young wife, Regina. She was merely an elegant collectible rarity in this gigantic mechanism, a fragile creation whose life was slowly shattering against the impregnable granite walls of the perfect house. Every evening, as thick twilight descended on the cold waters of the East River Strait and the heavy roar of the huge factory finally subsided, a solitary lamp was lit in the library of the granite mansion. At the massive mahogany table sat a man whose name was pronounced with reverence on all continents. William Steinway opened his personal diary. For a long 36 years, he recorded every lived day with frightening, manic pedantry. Today, these yellowed pages are carefully stored in the archives of the Smithsonian Institution, and it is they that reveal to us the darkest, most painful secret of the great American visionary. Reading these utterly frank entries, the reader inevitably encounters the most brutal moral paradox. How could a man capable of tuning the perfect sound of an entire symphony orchestra be completely deaf to the desperate pleas of his own family? While William aggressively conquered the world market, triumphantly opened new concert halls in Europe, ruthlessly fought corrupt politicians in Manhattan, and planned the laying of unimaginable underground tunnels, his young wife, Regina, was slowly going mad from suffocating loneliness. The 27 luxurious rooms of the huge mansion gradually turned into an exquisite, impenetrable prison for her. The house was in complete isolation. Around it stretched a closed workers' village on hundreds of acres, where only simple factory craftsmen lived. There were no social salons, no glittering evening receptions, no one equal to her in social status. William brought Regina to this house as his most valuable, flawless trophy.
Like a beautiful, expensive statuette that was supposed to silently adorn his monumental architectural masterpiece. The great industrialist was sincerely, soul-deep convinced that by providing his wife with boundless financial well-being, the finest fabrics from Europe, and a whole army of submissive servants, he had fully fulfilled his husbandly duty. His innate obsession with total control unceremoniously extended to her as well. In his ideal picture of the world, Regina was simply to wait for him in this luxurious golden cage, obediently performing the assigned role of the impeccable wife of a successful magnate. But human nature cruelly avenged the strategist for his cold, mechanistic self-confidence. In 1875, an explosion thundered that forever tore William Steinway's flawless life to shreds. Upon returning from another long trip, William made a horrific discovery. The third child that Regina had recently given birth to was from another man. This was not just a crushing humiliation of male dignity. It was a total, absolute collapse of his entire basic life philosophy. He had been ruthlessly betrayed in the most protected place on earth, right behind the impregnable granite walls of his personal fortress. William's diaries from that terrible period are thoroughly permeated with unbearable pain and burning despair. The scrape of a steel nib on thick paper in the night silence recorded sleepless nights when the magnate paced for hours along the long, empty marble corridors of his mansion, listening to the echo that now seemed hostile to him. But it was precisely at this turning point that history forces us to stop and pose an extremely uncomfortable moral question. Is William Steinway solely an innocent victim of cunning female deception? Or is he himself a cold anti-hero of his own fate? Can one in good conscience condemn a young, infinitely lonely woman who for years suffocated in an emotional vacuum next to a man who loved factory blueprints, cast-iron machines, and financial reports more than living human warmth? Regina, with her desperate, destructive act, proved to her husband what he categorically refused to understand. People cannot simply be bought and placed in positions like elite furniture from Europe, scented with centuries. The reader is left in deep doubt. We see a great philanthropist who built free libraries for other people's workers, but was an emotional tyrant who deprived his own wife of basic tenderness. The denouement of this drama was swift and merciless. In 1876, William initiated a grueling, exhausting divorce process. The family split forever. Regina, taking her illegitimate son, fled to France to escape the devastating public disgrace. And the great almighty magnate was left completely alone in his colossal house, among mirrors that now reflected only emptiness. With him in the mansion remained his two older legitimate children, whose psyches could not withstand this family catastrophe. His eldest son, raised without maternal warmth in the cold interiors of the huge estate, never managed to cope with his inner demons. Later, he would destroy his life with heavy alcoholism,
delivering yet another crushing blow to his aging father. William won all conceivable battles with the economy and competitors, but suffered a crushing defeat in the battle for happiness. This crisis forever broke the former arrogant dictator in him and forced him to begin a painful search for a completely new meaning to his existence. Deafening silence can be far more terrifying than the powerful factory roar.
After the heavy oak doors of the mansion closed forever behind Regina in 1876, who had fled to France from New York disgrace, the granite house plunged into a soul-chilling emptiness. At that moment, when the industrialist's personal world turned into ruins, the United States of America was hit by the most severe crisis. The country became mired in an unprecedented depression that began with the financial panic of 1873. Hundreds of enterprises went bankrupt, banks closed one after another, and crowds of unemployed and desperate people gathered on the streets of Manhattan. For William Steinway, this was a time of absolute double collapse. Sitting in the dark library, he listened to the raging wind from the East River Strait, and for the first time in his long life felt total, paralyzing helplessness. The man who had always sacredly believed in the infallibility of cold mathematical calculation and absolute personal control suddenly realized the error of his philosophy. His ideal factory utopia could not save him from macroeconomic shocks, and his fabulous wealth could not hold on to the love of the only woman. In these endless, tormenting nights, William began to radically rethink everything that had happened. In the soft light of the kerosene lamp, the image of the fled wife appeared before him in a completely new, frighteningly clear light. The blind rage of the deceived husband gradually gave way to an incredibly bitter insight. Regina no longer seemed to him simply an ungrateful traitor. He finally understood that her escape was the desperate cry of a living human soul refusing to be a submissive cog in his grand mechanism. She consciously chose social exile just to break out of the luxurious golden cage where her entire existence boiled down to the role of a beautiful, silent decoration. This late realization became the most painful punishment for the great strategist. He watched his growing, legitimate son, who, unable to withstand the icy pressure of his father's inflated expectations and the complete absence of maternal warmth, was inexorably sinking into the abyss of destructive alcoholism. William's entire world empire, all 27 luxurious rooms, huge marble fireplaces, and hundreds of thousands of produced grand pianos, instantly lost all meaning. Why build a great dynasty if your own blood is poisoned by unhappiness? Why create an instrument with perfect sound if in your own home only the hollow echo of lonely footsteps resounds? This terrible inner fracture launched Steinway's greatest personal transformation. If previously he was driven solely by the thirst for power over circumstances and the pursuit of social dominance, now he began desperately seeking true meaning. A colossal, irreversible shift occurred in his perception of his own gigantic wealth. Millions of dollars ceased to be a tool for erecting personal, impregnable bastions. From egoism and rigid possessiveness, William turned to the idea of selfless public service. He stopped viewing his 440 acres of land in Queens as an isolated, closed reservation for total control over the workers. The mansion, once proudly serving as a symbol of his arrogant solitude, widely flung open its invisible psychological doors. Steinway began investing colossal funds not in expanding his own luxury, but in public good, subconsciously hoping through large-scale help to completely strangers to atone for his heavy guilt before the destroyed family. He seemed to be trying to give the residents of the huge metropolis that freedom and carefree joy
which he had so methodically and cruelly deprived his young wife of. His new projects acquired truly epic scope, completely unrelated to profitable piano production. William fully financed and built the grand summer resort North Beach on the shores of Queens. He sincerely wanted poor families of simple workers to be able to come here for a minimal fee, freely breathe fresh sea air, and simply enjoy life. Many decades later, in the mid-20th century, it was precisely on the site of this bright amusement park that the world-famous LaGuardia Airport would be built. But the most striking act of his spiritual rebirth was the incredible engineering project of 1892. Steinway, a man already on the threshold of physical old age, began laying giant underground tunnels deep under the deadly currents of the East River Strait. The project seemed pure madness to all his pragmatic contemporaries. Ice-cold water constantly broke through the solid granite. Huge sums of money flowed away like an endless river. But the old manufacturer was unyielding. These ambitious tunnels were not needed for his personal enrichment. This was his farewell gift to the city, the only way to forever connect isolated Queens with the commercial heart of Manhattan. He was forging a heavy path into the future that he himself would never live to use. The transcendence of his goal reached the absolute. He no longer built deaf walls to shut himself off from the world. He dug underground tunnels to eternally unite people. Time inexorably and cruelly took its toll. In the deep autumn of 1896, William Steinway contracted a severe form of typhoid fever. His body, weakened to the limit by endless nervous upheavals and an unhealing spiritual wound, could no longer resist the heavy illness. In the last days of his life, he lay motionless in the huge master bedroom with high 12-foot ceilings, listening for hours to the monotonous patter of rain on the ancient glass of the observation tower. The massive mirrors that once reflected the invincible dictator of the world industry now showed only a mortally exhausted old man who had voluntarily given all his life forces on the altar of others' future. On November 30th, 1896, the tormented heart of the great visionary stopped forever. He passed away at the age of 61, leaving behind not only the greatest musical empire, but also a completely altered geography of the huge American metropolis. The luxurious granite mansion instantly plunged into heavy, mournful silence, and the unfinished tunnels deep under the river temporarily filled with ice-cold water, patiently awaiting their historical moment. The great puppeteer had forever left the earthly stage, but the most astonishing, bitter, and incredibly paradoxical thing in the long history of this forgotten house was still ahead, waiting for your command to write the 7th part. After William Steinway's heart stopped, the majestic granite mansion seemed to have lost its soul. The family of the great industrialist continued to own the estate by inertia for another 30 years, but without the iron will of its creator, the house rapidly withered. And here history makes the most striking, ironic turn, which completely overturns our established understanding of legacy and human pride. In 1926, this architectural masterpiece, into which a colossal $127,000 by the standards of that time had once been invested, went under the hammer at auction for a ridiculous sum. Just $45,000. And who became the new owner of the grand palace of the great monopolist? Not a haughty aristocrat from Fifth Avenue, and not a rich banker. The house was bought by Jack Halberian, a poor Turkish immigrant of Armenian origin who earned his living by the hard labor of a simple tailor. This incredible paradox exposes the fragility of all social illusions. The mansion, built as an impregnable stronghold to protect an elite family from the lower classes of society, was saved precisely by a representative of those very classes. During the ruthless Great Depression, the Halberian family had to rent out the luxurious rooms with Italian marble to random tenants just to survive and not lose the building. But it was precisely this simple family that gave the house what it had never had under the Steinways: genuine, unconditional devotion. The tailor's son, Michael Halberian, was born within these high walls and lived in them for a long 82 years. All his conscious life he voluntarily devoted to preserving the memory of William Steinway. Michael invested about $5 million of his personal funds, painstakingly earned over decades, into the endless restoration of the oak doors, stained glass domes, and granite facades. He turned the abandoned estate into an unofficial museum, fanatically saving someone else's history from complete oblivion. But time knows no mercy. At the end of 2010, Michael Halberian passed away, and the historic mansion was once again catastrophically orphaned. In 2014, unknown local investors acquired the historic estate for $2,650,000. Today, if you come to Queens, you will see a frightening picture. The once magnificent palace is completely cut off from the picturesque water by a giant, roaring power plant. It is mercilessly squeezed on all sides by ugly concrete warehouses and barbed wire fences. The mansion rises alone and doomed on a small green hill, like a silent ghost of the former grandeur of the 19th century, suffocating in the acrid smoke of machine oil and industrial dust. Why is this forgotten story so frighteningly relevant to us today? We live in an era when people are once again maniacally obsessed with the idea of absolute control. We build our own impregnable fortresses, be it global financial corporations, gated elite communities, or impenetrable digital security bastions. We naively believe that if we earn enough money and erect thicker walls, we can reliably protect ourselves from the chaos of the outside world, from family betrayal, from emotional pain, and from the most ruthless, time itself. But William Steinway's life ruthlessly shatters this sweet illusion. No millions of dollars, no thick granite walls, and no complex autonomous water supply systems can hold human love or halt the inevitable flow of fate. His path piercingly recalls the tragedy of the Great Gatsby. Like the famous literary hero, Steinway was a rags-to-riches man who created a colossal fortune and built a grand palace for one single purpose: to bring his ideal dream to life. But, unlike Gatsby's fragile world, Steinway's empire was tangible, heavy, and material. And yet the finale proved equally devastating. The cold palace remained standing, but the dream itself crumbled to dust forever. However, in the very finale of this bitter story lies the deepest revelation, which completely changes the meaning of everything told. The true legacy of the great industrialist is not the empty granite mansion that today is slowly dying amid industrial warehouses. It is not world domination in the musical instruments market, which did not save him from icy loneliness. His true, absolute immortality lies deep underground, in those very unimaginable tunnels that the old, broken magnate began piercing through granite at the sunset of his life, when he had finally despaired of finding personal happiness. Today, right this second, deep under the dark waters of the East River Strait, trains of New York City's No. 7 subway line thunder through Steinway's tunnels. Every single day, hundreds of thousands of utterly ordinary people rushing to work unknowingly benefit from the farewell gift of the man who once wanted to control the entire world. The story of the abandoned mansion in Queens teaches us the most important, universal law of the universe. What we greedily try to hold only for ourselves, locking behind oak doors, inevitably crumbles in time or falls to complete strangers. But that grand good which we sincerely and selflessly give to the world in the moment of our greatest life crisis makes our name truly eternal.